In today's video, I'm very excited and honored to interview Akshay, who is an excellent engineer who recently transitioned from code to management. I promise today's video, there's a little bit for everyone. Today, we're gonna talk about the skills that you need, the experiences, the hurdles, the realities of being a software engineering manager. This interview promises to challenge your perspective and give you insights that you've never seen anywhere else. Things like the first thing, I think a lot of people might be interested in this because they're looking for a job right now, which is like, hiring. And you're saying you're looking at resumes all the time. Do you have advice for people, that are looking for jobs right now in terms of, what to put in their resume, what kind of skills they need to have, what do you look for in a resume, etc.?
Yeah. So one thing that I have noticed is when people are looking out for a job, they feel quantity is more than quality. Which means like if I apply for, let's say, 200 jobs, the chance of me getting a call is going to be higher. I don't really agree to that. What I feel is, even though if it takes slightly more time, you should go through the job description in detail about what does that job really ask for and do you have those skill sets or not. Because like what I see is most of the resumes that I screen right now, I don't see any match between what the job description says and what the experience they have, right? I'm not saying that experience they have is not good or it's great. It's just not a right fit. So I'd say if I was applying again, I would make sure I look at the job description and make sure that does align with what the ask is. The other piece is, I would also say as a candidate, if you're applying for a company, you should go through the principles that the company follows and see if you align with that or not, right? Let's say for Remitly, right? We are very, very customer focused. And we always believe that we need to do the right thing for the customers because the entire business started because we wanted to take care of immigrants, right? If you don't align with that, I would say at some point in the interview process that would come at the surface, and at that point either you would not be hired or you would be hired and you would not be happy at the job.
Got it. That's a good point. So for your team specifically, you mentioned it's a full stack team. Are there specific skills or technologies that you look for?
Yeah, so honestly, we do look for skills and not for technology, specifically like not for languages, because I think as you grow in your career, your skills are what matters more than which language are you comfortable with, right? Because that can be translated very easily. The skills, and when I say skills, what I mean is, are you a problem solver? Do you even have the passion of working on front end, or do you have the passion of working on back end? Because you need to be excited to solve those problems. So that is something that I focus on more rather than, hey, we use, let's say, Kotlin. Have you guys used Kotlin in your experience or not? I don't think so. We care about that much.
Okay. So how do you, I feel like for me personally as a manager too, right? I feel like finding skills like that, it's a little bit tricky on a resume, like especially problem solving. So how do you look on the resume to find skills like problem solving, ability to work in an ambiguous area, things like that?
It depends upon the level of engineer you're looking for, right? Let's say if you're looking for someone who is fresh out of college, like the things that you would try to look for is if they've been asked to do something which is within a scope, are they able to do it or not? Right? Something like that. Compared to if you're looking for a more senior engineer, right? Within the resume, you can see what's the scope of the projects that they have worked on. And that itself talks about was the scope ambiguous or not, right? Because if you're saying that, hey, I have, let's say, worked on implementing, how do I put it? Okay, let's say I'm going to compare these two, right? One is, hey, implement chat, right? That itself, if I'm going to put on my resume that, hey, I worked on implementing chat for Meta, right? For that matter, it shows that I'm sure it was an ambiguous problem. And I'm sure that he or she had to go through a few rounds of negotiations, discussions, tech designs, and then get to that solution, right? So that itself says that that person is a problem solver. That person has worked in ambiguity. Compared to if I see a resume in which you say, hey, I implemented a service which was responsible to send data, right? Something like this, which is, I think, more narrow. And I would say that resume doesn't show if the person has the skills to work in ambiguous areas. Okay. So I think it's more of a judgment call as well. And over time, you would get you look for those keywords and you would be able to understand whether that person has worked on ambiguous problems or not.
Got it. So if I kind of rephrase what I hear from you, right, is trying to understand the scope of the work that they've done through their resume. It's either a project that you feel is more ambiguous, could have like different levels of, maybe like the UI, the backend, whatever it is, versus something that's a little bit more constrained, like maybe the scope is a little bit more constrained to like maybe a function or a service that's easier to kind of reason about, and then that kind of gives you an idea of what level of capability that person has. Does that sound about right?
Yes, that's right. And actually, it also depends upon, I should mention, it depends upon how your career ladder in your company is spaced out, right? Let's say if you're looking for a senior engineer, and within your company, the expectation from a senior engineer is to work across organization, across team, with stakeholders, with designers. If that is the expectation, that is something that you should look out for in a resume. If you see in a resume that that person has just worked in like solving very difficult tech problem by being by themselves or with two other engineers and has not worked on an end-to-end product, it could be that that person is brilliant at solving problem, but it does not mean that that person is going to fit in your team, because what your expectation is totally different. I think understanding what you're looking for and what's the bar that your company holds for that level is like the first thing you should know.
Got it. Okay. So I think another follow-up question that's very interesting too, right, is that usually there's a discussion of, do you hire the person for the role that's needed now, or you hire this person for the role that you might need in the future? How do you think about this?
Okay, let me think about that, right? So usually what I have done, right, is I have a 6 month to 1 year outlook of what I want my team to do, and usually I hire for that. Because if you're gonna hire for something that you want right now, as a manager, you are already late. Because what you're gonna be doing is, let's say it's gonna take you 3 months to hire. It's gonna take you next 3 months to ramp up that engineer, and it's already 6 months into the year where you're already late at what you are gonna do. So I'd say as a manager or as a leader, it's your responsibility to predict where you wanna see your team in the next 1 year and start building that muscle right now. So if you're doing something 6 months from now, it's already late for that.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're always hiring for the future.
Correct.
Right? So you want to, okay, makes sense. Now, as a manager, maybe as someone who's in the industry, right? Let's talk about what are some trends that you're most excited about right now. Everyone's talking about Gen AI, right? AI eating everyone's lunch. What's your perspective? What are trends you're excited about?
Yeah, so I think the two most recent things that we've been hearing about, right, especially within the tech industry, one is what you spoke about, Gen AI, LLM, and all of that. And the second piece is about return to office, connected work, RTO, whatever different companies are calling it. So I think those are the two things that I like to talk about. The first thing is about Gen AI, and a lot of engineers are worried about that, hey, is this going to take my job away? A lot of managers are worried, is it going to take my job away? A lot of content writers within like Remitly are worried, right? Like that, what's next for us, right? So I think even though we see this trend right now, but if you compare like this to the last 20 years of tech history, I don't think so this is something which we have never seen before. So if you compare 20 years from today, I remember stories from Expedia, my managers telling me that 20 years ago, we used to talk about there being deployment engineers who are responsible for deploying a service to production, and that used to take almost a week. And the only thing that they did was deploy something, right? That was a job. Now let's talk about AWS or Google Cloud, right? Like with that, you don't really need that skill set. But having said that, right, like that has become a part of your daily job, and you build a skill on top of that. So I think with LLM, with Gen AI, it's going to be the same thing. Eventually, it's going to be streamlined, and engineers are going to use that to be more efficient. It's never going to be that you're not going to need engineers. You just use that as a toolkit and build on top of that to solve problems and bigger problems. So I think we should rather be excited about this, where we are going to not do something which is mundane or can get mundane in like 2 years from now, and we'll solve bigger problems.
So it sounds like your perspective is AI and human beings are going to be like partners together.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than AIs being replacement of human software engineers.
So what I would say is AI is going to be replacement for a few things that we've been doing for a while and we've become good at. So we are going to outsource that through AI, and we are going to use that as a tool for us to solve bigger problems. So
Do you like some examples of what are those things that you're thinking?
So I'm just going to go back in the history, right? Let's say that deployment engineer who was just 1 week deploying these things, eventually that engineer started using AWS Cloud just to deploy within a couple of minutes and learn a new skill so that that person could build an infra on top of it, or that person could build a service on top of it, something like that, right? Now, let's say and the second thing is, right, like we believe AI is getting relatively good at writing code, able to convert speech to code, all of that. But I think it's going to be a while before it gets that judgment, right? Let's talk about designs, right? Software designs, even though they look easy, they're not easy. And I think it's going to take a while before LLMs or any of the Gen AI can replace that skill. Right. So it could be that eventually the amount of time to write code might reduce because you're going to use these tools. But as an engineer, you're going to work on more designing bigger systems, solving more problems, being more customer focused. So I think that is the lens that I look at it with.
Got it. Okay. Have you seen Devin AI? Have you heard of it?
What's that?
Have you heard of Devin?
Mm-hmm.
No? Okay. So Devin's like very interesting. It's a AI agent. You know, basically they call it like the AI software engineer. So the demo video that they have for it was, you give it a prompt and say like, hey, build me, say like TikTok. Right? You just give it a prompt, and then this Devin AI is gonna run its own like research on Google to find out, okay, how do you build a website? And then it tries to create, copy and paste, runs it, sees an error, goes and research on Google what the error is, and then tries to fix the code for that, and then eventually run this whole thing. So the demo looks very impressive. If you haven't seen it,
I should.
You know, definitely I'll send it to you later on.
Awesome, cool.
It's very impressive. You know, everyone on the internet is just going crazy because they're saying, "Oh, engineers are gonna get replaced," right? Because it's essentially what engineers, a lot of them are doing, right? You just go on Stack Overflow, go on Google, and try to figure things out, and then kind of build it out.
But yeah, agreed. But I think we are looking at a happy case scenario, right? And like there is, like, okay, about the same thing, right? Like how many times you start something from scratch? Not a lot of times as an SDE, right? You're going to be using a lot of nuances, a lot of historical decisions that are driven within your organization. You're going to use a lot of domain knowledge. You're going to use a lot of sister teams that you worked with and work with their hacks. I don't think that is something which your AI can do at this point, right? Unless and until the entire ecosystem is built in a way that everything is happening through AI, sure. And I think we are a couple of years away from that.
Okay. And how's your team, or either you or your team, leveraging AI in your daily work right now? And what sort of impact or effects you're seeing right now?
Yeah, so the space that I work in, right, which is customer success, AI has been, I think, Gen AI is the right solution that we should be using for a lot of our problems. So I'll give you an example, right? We're at this point building a chatbot because we want to help as many customers as we can rather than them going down to the agents, right? And our team is actually exploring chatbot implementation right now, just getting more summarized answers to the customer. We have like thousands of articles trying to find what is the most vital thing that's important for that customer and showing that data. And yeah, that's we've been using a lot of AWS tech for that they've been coming up with. And having said that, right, like I think as a manager and as an SDE, we need to be dedicated to take some time and invest and understand that. Because even as a manager, right, I might not be doing that hands-on today, but I do need to play around with it to understand what is possible and what's not possible, and make sure that I invest enough time of my team also to experiment, play around with it, and be at industry par with that.
Got it. So maybe talking about like your team day to day specifically, right? So the kind of example, the chatbot you talked about, that's the product side, I'm assuming, that you guys are trying to build. Are there other uses of AI within like the day-to-day of your team to either speed up developer efficiency or speed up workflow? And what does that kind of look like right now?
Yeah, so at this point, I would say the other like we've done some internal research which shows like 60% of our engineers don't go on Google any longer, and they've just been using ChatGPT at this point. And there are, but definitely it comes up, since we are a fintech company, we want to be really aware about what data we are sharing, what data we are not sharing. So within the company itself, we do have a safety net that we have built, that if you're using ChatGPT, you should be using in this format, just so that we don't expose any data. We are still compliant to all the licenses and all of that. So I would say within my team, I see, or even for myself, right, I see a lot of emails that I have written, a lot of communication docs that I'm going through, a lot of design verification I do through ChatGPT, right? And that's what my team has been doing as well. We do have a couple of interns as well who are working on just UI tooling, so that we can improve the coaching, we can improve training of our agents, and using ChatGPT. So I would say there are a lot of use cases, but we want to make sure that those use cases are actually meant to be solved with Gen AI rather than just doing it because it's cool. So we are really aware about that.
Got it. Okay. So it sounds like the kind of use case, like the day-to-day use cases around like prompting ChatGPT for like communication, for design reviews, maybe. What about for developer, right? Like development, like code analysis. Do you guys have anything around leveraging AI to maybe find bugs a little bit faster, or code completion, test case writing, and things like that? Anything around those areas?
Yeah. So within my team specifically, like I said, we do have an internal ChatGPT compliant piece through which we do all of this, but I would not say it's a streamlined process within the company.
Okay.
So like a lot of unit test cases and a lot of that does come out of that today, because an engineer can spend time, but I don't think they should be spending a lot of time on that because it's out of the box right now. So for that, we do use ChatGPT. But beyond that, like integration testing or smoke testing and all of that, that is something that we still do it through engineers and not through ChatGPT.
Got it. Okay. So you mentioned just now, like trying to allocate more time to learn about AI, LLMs, and all that. So for you personally, how are you spending time? Like, how are you learning about all these different things? Because there's just so many things that you could be learning, like RAG and vector databases and all of that. So how are you spending time learning those things?
Yeah. So, and this is something that I have done personally. I don't know how it's going to help everyone, but I found one use case within my company which I think is a good fit, which if it succeeds, it's going to help customers, right? So I found a problem, and I think that problem can be solved using Gen AI, right? But having said that, it's not just Gen AI, but before that, I might have to do some modeling, I might have to do some classification and all of that. So I'm taking it step by step and seeing at every step, is this the right solution that I should be using? And if it is, then I learn a new skill on top of that. So this is the way I'm going. Like I found a problem, I broke that problem into different steps, and for each step, I'm seeing if AI or Gen AI or LLM or Bedrock or whichever tech I want to use, is that the right way? And if it is, then I'm investing more time into that.
Okay. So it sounds you're taking more of like the pragmatic, practical approach of like figuring out a problem that you want to solve, right? It could be a company or maybe like the side project that you want to work on, and then trying to iteratively kind of figure out what are the tech that you need, what are the areas that you might need to solve that problem, and then kind of learn that as you go.
Yeah, and yes, but having said that, the problem that I have picked does seem like it is a problem that can be solved with Gen AI. But within that problem itself, there are some segments for which I don't need Gen AI that can be simply solved through a rule engine, right? And I'm trying to figure that piece out. And like you said, yes, I'm not looking at the other way where I learn the theory of it and then get to solving problem. That's another way. But I think it's more exciting for me if I have a problem in mind, and based on that problem, I start learning the tech behind it.
Got it. Do you have a dedicated process that you go through to kind of learn these new things? Like, do you allocate time every week to learn this, or do you have a course that you take?
Yeah. So I've not been taking a course. I did start with one, but I've not been super dedicated to it, which is my bad. But what I try to do is every Friday, I try to invest at least 2 hours at my self-learning. And that is something that, so within my team, that Friday is a no meeting Friday. So for engineers, I want to make sure that they get their focus time. And that's similar for me, but I'm able to give 2 hours of my Friday to this particular project and see where I get to it. So yeah, that's what I do.
Nice. I think that's always something that's really critical, self-learning basically.
Yeah, and honestly, I feel, and I think it's very easy to deprioritize that time,
right,
with taking up another meeting, right, where you're aligning on something. But I think in long term, your self-learning is equally important for compared to like you just delivering on something or you having a one-on-one with something. Because eventually, if you are self-learning and you're being updated, that means your team is going to be updated as well. Your team is going to be able to solve problems in the best way because you know about that tech. So being an EM, sure, like you don't work on coding every day, but you still need to know tech because that's eventually what your team is working on.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's super important. Like